So our first presenter this morning is Callum Love. Callum's the Sustainable Ag Program Coordinator at NACC NRM. And the project that he is going to be talking about is managing catchment scale flood and fire risk in a productive landscape. And I'm just going to hand over to Callum if you want to share your screen and take it away. If it looks like you're going really over time, Callum, I will dive in and do something to help you finish up.
Yep, no, fair enough. I do sometimes have a tendency to ramble once I start. So, yeah, cut me off. Sorry, just give me a sec to set everything up so I can see properly. I'm hoping everyone can see an opening slide.
Yes, we can.
All right. I may talk a little bit too much about who we are and where we are, and apologies for that, but it's sort of probably an important piece of context for everybody. Before I kick off, I would also like to just quickly acknowledge the Yamatji people, who are the traditional owners of the land that our offices are located on, and more broadly, the Yamatji and Noongar people, who are the original natural resource managers of the Northern Agricultural Region as a whole. And in that, acknowledge their enduring connection to the land and extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. And with that, I'll get going. So the Northern Agricultural Region is the region that we, I guess, manage, operate within. It's actually pretty close to 7.5 million hectares. We're in the northern tip of the Southwest Land Division, so the end of sort of broadacre agriculture as you move north in WA. There's 14 local government areas. It's very sparsely populated, certainly not the lowest population density of any NRM region in the state, but it is one of our major challenges. So we deliver projects across 4 broad themes, which is our Aboriginal custodianship programs, our biodiversity programs, coastal marine, and sustainable agriculture program, which I coordinate. Beck's already told you all that, so I'll skip past that. Largely, the ag program is looking to help farmers tackle environmental issues and ensure that the agriculture in the region remains sustainable through proactive management. There's a couple of mechanisms we use for that. We help them access funding. We run trials, events, general capacity building. Sorry, got staff traveling, so I need to check that. Sorry about that. All right. Probably a little bit of background about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so before we talk too much about that, there's a couple of sort of past works I would like to mention. Probably the largest impact NACC NRM has had in this sort of landscape scale space is our Rivers and Wetlands program. That ran from 2009 to 2017. I actually started working at NACC somewhere in the middle of that, so I've been around here for a little while. That project was focused on stabilising, protecting and revegetating riparian zones. There was an approximate outcome of that project of 5,000 hectares of riparian vegetation, implemented, protected, enhanced. The actual number is way higher than that, but as with all things that are funded through competitive grant rounds, unfortunately the measurement stopped at the funding, so we didn't properly capture the in-kind and the follow-on works that have happened with that. The other sort of contributing past works that are worth mentioning is the Chapman Catchment Regeneration Project. That ran for 3 years total. I've said here it ended in 21, but it's actually 2022. I've got that wrong. It was focused on 6 properties within the Chapman catchment, which is the catchment that runs, the lower part of the catchment runs straight through Geraldton. It was focused on 6 properties within that catchment. We undertook farm or site scale catchment planning, rehydration planning. We installed mechanical interventions, revegetated, installed fodder and stock protection zones. the focus of that was really that landscape sort of repair, as well as a real focus on farm production. So, and that's a bit of a theme throughout our trial, is how we can do these works, these apply nature-based solutions and do it in a way that there isn't a negative impact on the agricultural production. Why we do that, I'll get to that a little bit later. That project actually was a sort of pilot, if you like, and it was activities identified in planning that was done in 2008, when a catchment plan was developed for the entire Chapman catchment. So that sort of gives a bit of an idea sometimes how long it is between an idea happening up here and the actual activity, finding the right people or the right funding so it can go ahead. With that, I'm just got to move my Zoom thing out of the way so I can see. Moving forward into sort of our current and future works in this space, we've had a few attempts at funding similar works, extending that Chapman catchment project. Within the Hill River, we've had some success. It's mostly been small scale stuff where we've tied in with landholders already doing work or groups that are already doing work. The Chapman and Hutt River, which are the ones at Geraldton and north of Geraldton, we've done some small works, mostly really focused at farm scale, single landholder. We haven't been able to get that larger impact, which we're hoping that we can now address through this trial. And then the other, probably the largest catchment in our region, is the Moore River. That's been the hardest for us to do any work. Historically, the Moore River has had some flooding. There's a lot of concern because the farmland in the area historically has been quite wet. There's a lot of concern around salinity and waterlogging. So trying to sell a project that is essentially looking to repair water cycles can be a bit difficult in that space. There's just a lot of sort of fear and hesitation with the people that we tend to work with. And it's something that we're chipping away and we'll get to eventually. And that sort of leads nicely into the next bit of context that which is who we work with. As much as possible, we're working with local groups in all of our projects. That includes our nature-based solutions trial, with a particular focus on grower groups. And once we get further down the catchments towards, the sort of river mouths and the actual town sites, we work a lot with friends of groups. So the Chapman River Friends, Friends of Greenough River, as well as some smaller land care groups. They tend to be far less focused on the agricultural or the economic and are really interested in the social and the environmental impacts, which is quite convenient because in a catchment, they probably see the worst of the environmental impact with the stuff that flows off and ends up at the river mouths. Site works that we do are pretty exclusively undertaken with land managers on private land holdings. As I mentioned before, the region's about 7.5 million hectares. About 65, 67% of that is managed privately as agricultural land. Whoops, sorry. So that dictates a little bit who we work with. Some of the river systems are managed by DBCA. The working in that space has its own challenges, as well as there is some definite pros to that. It's much easier to convince a state government to do large scale works than it is to convince, say, 12, 13 different landholders. And the other, I guess, group of people that we're looking to work through these trials specifically is the NRMRA and this community of practice. We've already actually learned a little bit, made a few changes based on the things that have been presented by other groups in these meetings, as well as conversations we've had with Beck and Sarah and various different people. So that leads us into why we're doing the trial we're doing. The catchment systems in our region, I've talked about, our majority land use, they are heavily modified. They've been cleared for agriculture. That comes with all the environmental issues that we're all used to seeing. There's a lot of soil stability issues, particularly around riparian zones, salinity. The water holding capacity of a lot of the soils is not fantastic. Whether that's through a loss of soil carbon, whether it's a loss of actual soil structure. So it's a real focus of this project is finding the places where we can do really intense works to repair that as sort of a adoption pathway, a proof of concept, if you like, for the landholders around it. Sorry, my computer's beeping at me, and I don't know if that's anyone in this Zoom chat or if it's something else.
I can't see anything in the Zoom chat I can't see anything in the chat, actually, so it's not us, it's something else.
I'm not being told to stop rambling. Yeah, so the idea is that we're repairing waterways. We're going to repair that sort of damaged natural water cycle. I don't think I really need to explain in this forum why we do that, but we're hoping that by collecting evidence of these activities within a productive agricultural landscape that hasn't negatively and hopefully has positively impacted agricultural production, we'll be able to sort of prove that this is the way forward for farming systems in the Northern Agricultural Region. The other thing with that is, and I mean, this is not unique to us, I imagine it's something that is repeated all around the country, but most of these catchments have a town in the area that is most likely to flood, whether that's the lowest point in the catchment or, say, for the Moore River, there's quite a large town which historically has flooded, which is Moora. And so it's, I'm not sure where I was going with that. Anyway, that's one of the reasons why. It's a lot of our population density is in the most vulnerable parts of these catchments. So a good reason to repair the landscape and those water systems. I am actually missing a slide here. That's all right. I've got some notes. Right, so the actual works for the trials themselves. So the first thing we need to get done, what we've actually mostly done now, is site selection. We're looking for sites that have good potential for providing us decent amounts of land to work on without taking too much productive agricultural land. We found straight away that removed about 80% of the agricultural sites that we were originally considering. We weren't expecting that many, but unfortunately, there's been some changes in agricultural production around here. A lot of the land managers we have worked with on this sort of thing are mixed farms with sheep production, and a lot of them are a little bit cautious on committing land to fodder and to stock production with the sort of recent changes to sheep exports, in the interest of making sure the project is successful. We've sort of said to those guys, we'd like to work with you, maybe this isn't the thing, so we've moved on. Those sites are selected. We're now into the developing projects, so property scale site planning, looking at rehydration activities, so holding water higher in the landscape. We're looking at activities right down in the riparian zones, so increases in vegetation, in deep-rooted perennials particularly, things that will hopefully slow the water flow into the river systems. Then we're going to build on that by building structures within the river systems themselves, whether that's weaky layers or bank protections, which I think was talked about in the COP 2 COPs ago. Nothing sort of that intense. We're obviously much smaller water systems here, so armouring water banks and stuff we can do with some rocks and get away with doing brushing rather than building great big bits of infrastructure. And the key thing there is really focusing on that and I know it's an old term, but the triple bottom line. So making sure that we're getting the environmental, the economic and the social impacts nice and balanced so that everyone's happy. Obviously, I've talked about the majority land holding being private. So when we're planning these, we really need to focus on meeting the outcomes of the people that own that land as well. Otherwise, we're just going to get zero buy-in. Obviously, we need to set up our baseline monitoring. That's pretty basic. We're hoping to do some flood modelling, trying to find a provider to do that. So if anyone has any fantastic ideas on who can do some flood modelling for us, I would love to hear them. And yeah, get in touch with me if you know somebody. As far as the actual site works themselves, the mechanical interventions, where there's going to be 3 basic approaches, which are sort of contour banks and leaky weirs, armouring of particularly vulnerable parts of the catchments. The real focus being slow that water flow down into the creeks and then through the river systems themselves, establishing that vegetation. We're looking to achieve a bit of a co-benefit in our vegetation establishment, and that's looking at where we can improve our fire resilience. The work that is being done by Southwest Catchment Council has been particularly useful to us. I've watched their presentation the other day, and I've already made a few little changes to what we were looking at. But we're just looking to borrow a little bit. We might not get exactly the best biodiversity outcomes from that vegetation, but if we can focus a little bit on planting stuff with lower volatile oil contents, structuring those plantings a little bit better so that they work as fire buffer zones, as well as planning places in the landscape they can go, which sort of intersect the landscape in a more natural way rather than our sort of current protection plantings, which tend to be straight lines. They don't sort of consider things like what pathway of fire is going to take through the landscape. So that's a co-benefit. We're fairly focused on it. It's obviously not the key focus of the trial, but we're hoping that we will at least get some measurable benefit from that.
Callum, I'm just going to dive in with a 2-minute warning.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm nearly done anyway now that I've lost a slide. There's a couple of challenges for implementation, really key challenges. I've spoken probably too much about who the land managers are and how that affects the project. But it really can't be understated how severe the competing interests are in landscape management in the Northern Agricultural Region. The ownership of land is changing over time. We're getting more and more corporate farms. We're getting more and more family farms who are really large businesses. And so their interest in the environmental becomes more economic, if you like, as those businesses get bigger. They're more concerned about opportunity costs. They're more concerned about risk. And anecdotally, they seem to be less concerned about their input to the public good. That is a sort of personality and business dependent. But we have found that it is much easier to convince smaller family farms to buy into projects like this. They do seem to have a stronger interest in things that provide public good, that have a social outcome. Obviously, the business complexity, I guess, removes people's bandwidth for being involved in stuff like this. So bigger businesses, more complex. Moving on to the slide that I've got up now. The key thing, these are just the key things we're looking to measure. And I guess these are the things that will tell us what our success looks like. Some of it's pretty basic stuff, changing canopy, our ground cover, how much bare soil's there is all pretty simple. These are the indicators that we use for our engagement through our grower groups, our land manager, our community groups. They're really easy ways to demonstrate a change. When we're looking at canopy and ground cover, we're going to focus a lot more for the sort of nature-based solution side of it in the actual composition of that. And that comes back to our low volatility, our biodiversity outcomes, as well in part our outcomes for fodder and stock protection as well. Water velocity is obviously a pretty simple one. We're looking for less velocity after rainfall events. That's tied into, we want to see more ponding within the river systems themselves in those drier periods. So we want water moving slower for longer. You know, simple counts of the number of mechanical interventions. It's kind of hard to get an outcome measurement on those because it's sort of a contributing thing rather than a simple measurable outcome. And then water quality in our standing water is going to be a really important one. That's going to be both at that sort of landholder scale, so within the farm systems, as well as hopefully our sites are designed in a way that we've sort of got a couple on tributaries that meet. So we're hoping that we will be able to create an increase in water quality where those tributaries meet, where that water sits for a little while, as well as a lot further down the catchments, although that's probably a little bit blue sky thinking. We're probably not doing enough within the catchment itself to actually see a water quality change at the river mouth. And the sort of last, probably quite important measure, particularly for the stock managers that we're working with, is the soil moisture in the adjacent riparian and sort of ground cover fodder zones. Essentially, that's our proxy measure for soil health and water holding capacity. So we're making the assumption that if there's moisture in those soils for a longer period of time over the year, that we've either increased that soil carbon or we have a much better soil structure happening there. In terms of where we're going now, we're racing against seasonal windows. We have had a strange opening to the season. We've had very little rainfall up till now, and we've had a lot of rainfall in the last 2 weeks, which has unfortunately put a bit of pressure on us for this project. It means that it's a little bit too wet in a lot of our sites to actually do anything now, and there is some concern with the people who are doing our plantings and things that the moisture is going to disappear a little bit too quickly to get really good vegetation establishment. But that's sort of the nature of NRM and working in this region. And I mean, is the point of these things, climate variability is not making anything easier. So we work around it, and hopefully we can prove long-term that these solutions work as a method for adapting to climate change. I think that's it from me. I've talked for way too long. I think I had 15 minutes. I've been going for 20. So if anyone has any questions, now's the time.
Thanks, Callum.